Hello, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us. My name is Micah Bennett, and I'm a product design manager at Asana in the New York office. And I'm joined today with some colleagues, Jina, a product design manager based in San Francisco, Tyson, Kallberg, a product designer also in San Francisco, and Catt, a product designer here in New York with myself. Welcome, everyone.
Hi.
Hello. So to kick it off, we'll be spending about 40 minutes with some Q&A with our panelists, and these questions were actually brought to you by our audience. People filled out a form ahead of time, so thanks for those that submitted it. And we'll be saving some time at the end, about 15 minutes for audience Q&A. So feel free to drop those in the chat as things progress, and we'll try and get to them. And then we'll close out about 5 minutes till the hour, just with some closing remarks. So to kick us off, I would love for everyone on the panel to introduce themselves and share their experience of how they got into the path that they are in now in their career. Anyone want to go first?
I was thinking if we're going in the order of the slide, I can go next. Hi, everyone. I'm Jina. I am a product design manager at Asana. I manage the designers on the design system team. And I've actually been at Asana literally 1 year as of yesterday, and I am also a first-time manager. I've been doing design systems for a while, but this is my first role as doing it as a manager. Yeah, and was there anything else you wanted to know? Is that good? All right, let's
That's perfect.
We can keep with the order thing. I like that. Tyson, I've been at Asana for 8 years as of September, so a long time. My career has been kind of in and out of management over time. So before I joined Asana, I was managing a team of designers at a consultancy, about 6 folks. Before that, I was a freelancer. When I moved to San Francisco, I actually moved out of management and back into IC when I joined Asana. And then since then, did a bit of product design management. I was head of design for 2.5 years, managing both brand and product designers. Then I was a pillar lead, which is sort of like a director here, for 2 years. And then more recently, as of 5 months ago, time's hard, moved into a IC position once again. So kind of rubber banded a lot over time.
Amazing.
Tyson, describe all of our product design org from start to finish.
100%. And hi, I'm Catt. I too am a product designer here on the IC side. How did I get here? I've been working at Asana since January of 2020. Before that, I was working at Etsy for like 3.5 years or something like that. Prior to that, I worked at SoundCloud for like 2 years. I worked at some startups. I worked at NASDAQ twice in a row for like a year each time. And I've mostly been in IC the whole time for the 11 years that I've been working full time. I did have a stint where I tried management when I was at SoundCloud, and we can talk about it more during this panel, but yeah, it's been really fun kind of diving really deep into the practice of being an IC at more senior levels.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone. Yes, Tyson, this was a teaser. We would love to know what motivated you all to go down your various paths of manager or senior IC, and what do you see as the biggest differences between those two paths?
I can jump in. Yeah, I've been an IC for most of my career, but during my time, previous to Asana, I've done design systems work at other companies, including Salesforce. And during my time at Salesforce, some of my colleagues told me like, "Oh, you'd be such a good manager," and I thought about it. I was like, would I be? And, I really loved doing the work, but it always appealed to me. And then after I'd left Salesforce and, I had a couple other gigs after that, I kept thinking like, is this the path I want? Is this the path I want? And I was just like teetering back and forth between that. And then, you know, I'd even interviewed at a few companies to see if, you know, it was right for me. And sometimes you hear like, oh, you don't have previous management experience, so they actually decide not to pursue you. But my current manager, Sarah, actually reached out to me and was like, hey, we're looking for a manager for a design system team. And so the opportunity was open for me. And I just felt like I needed to go for it and try it, you know, and you never really know if it's right for you until you try it. And so here I am. Yeah.
We're lucky to have you. And Catt, how about you? I know you mentioned you had a brief stint as a manager. What does that path look like for you?
Yeah, so in around 2015, I think, something around there, I was working at SoundCloud, and I, at that point, was moving more towards senior. And it's funny because Gina's current manager is a person that I worked with while I was there. And like, you know, I was thinking a lot about like career growth pathing. I'd been doing product design at that point for, you know, like 6 years or something, 5 or 6 years. And I was just kind of like, okay, well, if this is what's next, like I want to at least try it. So first I got I like managed an intern, like with another person. So we kind of co-managed an intern, and that seemed fine. So I tried managing my own intern and like actually participated in the hiring and stuff. It ended up being that we got 2 interns for me instead of 1, just because the 2 people that I found, like I didn't want to like turn one down because I just thought they complemented each other really well. So I like proposed to the person that was my manager at that point in time, like, can I get these 2 folks to work with? Because that would be awesome. I will caveat with that my experience also included still being responsible for like senior design workload and having to like lead the design of some product design work that we were doing. So I was both managing and responsible for the output of these folks' work and my own work. And I think that like what I realized through that process for me is that it was a whole other skill set, and that I was much more interested in the outcomes of the work itself than some of the more people management related stuff. Like I love mentorship. I really enjoy, you know, like, yeah, like having conversations about people's careers. But I think some of the other parts of it were just things I was less interested in. And I think like I was very anxious the whole time. Like, I hope I'm doing this right. So I decided to dive much deeper into like the strategy of the work. And that's what I ended up kind of deciding to do from there. I then went to Etsy, where I like saw actual people like Jess Harley, for example, who were staff IC designers basically, and realized like, oh, this is a thing. Like, I think when I was working at my previous company, I didn't realize that, that like you could be senior or plus and not have to manage people. So when I realized that, I was like, this is what I want to do. And I've really enjoyed the work that I've gotten to do at Asana, because I feel like they're really like as Asana has scaled as a company, they've been thinking more and more about this and are extremely supportive of that path, where there are some people who really want to support people in certain ways. And then there's people like me who are like, I like human beings, but I want to design experiences for them more than I want to think about designing teams, at least right now.
Awesome.
Tyson.
Yeah. Tyson, you talked about the rubber banding. So what do you think are the biggest differences in all those different paths that you tried so far?
I was thinking a little bit about that beforehand, because sometimes it's easy in the sense that there's like pure manager skills, like dealing with growth, dealing with things like performance, organization building, process building, those kind of things that feel like sort of hard management skills. But there's also a pretty mushy middle that ends up feeling pretty similar. So like, I think, especially moving from consultancy to in-house, and then I guess, you know, moving within Asana a bunch of ways, there's a lot of skills I leaned on in terms of like partnerships I've made or working with stakeholders that feel really applicable between both IC and management. So there's sort of a soft skills core that I think ends up being really similar between the two. But I think to Catt's point, it's kind of like, what do you want to do in your day-to-day? A big reason, like the first time I did management, I didn't really have a choice. It was like I was the only designer and we needed to hire designers. It was like, well, you're a 23-year-old designer, you should hire people. And I'm like, cool. So like that was definitely like necessity, very little training crash course. And then obviously, you know, moving back to IC and then going into management again, that was a much more intentional choice. And my initial reason from leaving management to go to IC was both a existential, is this what I want to do with the rest of my life question? Because at the time it felt very much like a one-way door for whatever reason. But also like bluntly, I didn't think I could market myself being not from San Francisco and the Bay Area as a manager, given that I was from Vancouver and wasn't a bustling tech hub where people were teaching great management skills. They were just giving 23-year-olds job recs and hoping they'd figure it out. So a lot of it early was necessity, and then later in my career, it's felt a lot more intentional. Both moving back into management as people gave me a lot of energy, and then this recent move back to IC, which was a response internally for myself, which is like wanting to be near the craft again. I was talking to someone about like keeping your knives sharp, cooking idioms. It felt a lot like that. Like I felt like I wanted to get back to it. I wanted to be near the pixels. And I fully expect that at some point in my future, I will probably swing back the other way.
Awesome. Yeah. I love the mushy middle metaphor. I'm going to use that. What advice would you give, Jina, to folks who are at this fork in their career and thinking about what's next for them?
Good question. I would say to really do it for the right reasons. I think there's a tendency sometimes to have the ambition like, oh, I have to be a manager because that's the only way to prove that I've made it, you know, but that is not necessarily true. And I think it needs to be more around like, I want to help coach and guide a team towards, you know, in my case, it would be design systems, but whatever area that you're in, like you can still be passionate about that, even if you're not doing all the hands-on work. And so, yeah, like for me, it was more like, I want to be able to have a big impact with the design system team, but I've already built design systems from the ground up. So let me try this from a different angle versus like, oh, I just want that title, you know? And so definitely, I would say like, really think about what your reason is and do it for the right reasons.
Awesome. Catt, I saw you snapping your fingers.
Oh my God. Yeah, I think it's really important. Like that's the thing that I continuously reflect on in terms of the time that I tried. Like I think I have a lot of strong opinions about like what goes into a good manager. And so I wanted to give it a shot, but I do think that reflecting on what I was looking for at that time, it was my core motivation was definitely like, what's the next thing? Oh, I feel like this has to be the next thing. So I guess I'll try it. But yeah, like if you're really deeply interested in things like how to design a team, like thinking about like, you know, like the kind of mushy stuff in terms of like, well, will this person work well with this other person? And like, you know, what is our strategy for like thinking about things like, I mean, quality, right? And like all that kind of stuff, like you're designing the systems that people will function within. And like, that's really cool. And also for me, I still feel like I want to do some of the other like more on the ground design stuff. And like, I really think it is a matter of just like really assessing like what interests you. Are you willing to step away from being as hands-on? Because the most challenging thing for your reports is going to be somebody who is micromanaging. And so like, you just have to accept that that's not going to be a thing you're going to do or like, you know, that you have to be okay with that. So really consider like what your objective is, what your hopes are and the outcome you're hoping for, and just make sure that you're doing it for the people who are going to be reporting to you and not for some other growth reason.
100%. Tyson?
Agree with all of that good stuff. I think the thing I've been talking to a lot of people about manager IC transitions, not unexpectedly. And something that seems to come up a lot, which isn't surprising, but a good thing to remember is like, I have felt this way myself. This isn't a one-way door. Like taking the chance on trying management doesn't mean you're going to be a manager forever. And it doesn't mean you can't go back to design. And it's very easy. I think trying to theorize whether or not you'll like these things is worth going through the effort. But at some point you have to jump in the pool and see if you enjoy it. At some point you'll realize like maybe it's not for you, and that's also totally okay. You didn't fail. It's just not how you enjoy spending your time. And I think remembering that that's possible is really important, and not all companies are supportive of that. Hopefully we get better at that at time. I've been really thankful to be able to make as many transitions role-wise that I have at Asana without feeling like I have to go somewhere else to do it. But even if you have to do that, like giving it a shot is sometimes your best bet. And the opportunities don't necessarily always roll along either. So dismissing them just because it's not the perfect time is also something we're thinking about.
It's really good advice. And our next question actually overlaps with what Andre posted in the chat. What are some of the qualities, or Jina, you were saying like what makes a good manager or senior IC? What kind of skill sets do we look for both of those type roles in your opinion?
I'll speak to the manager part and let Catt or Tyson talk to the IC part, but this is something actually I saw Sarah in the chat. Hi, something we've talked about together is like having those like people skills, like being empathetic, but like you know, like not always like trying to like have your team do what you want them to do, but more like it's like more like a co-creation thing with them of like, you know, what can we do together to get you to where you want to be? And so I think if you have that type of personality where you want to like help other people to get to where they want to be, like that to me like makes an amazing manager. Like one of the best managers I've had from my time at Salesforce, you know, he was leaving, but on his way out, he made it his mission to get everybody on his team promoted. And I just thought that was like a really sweet, thoughtful thing to do. Sorry, Google Calendar. Yeah, but not just because we all wanted that promotion, but it really showed that like he cared about us and wanted us to grow. And so I see that happening, you know, here at Asana. And I just think, yeah, like to me, that's much more important than, you know, like having the right answers to, you know, whatever problem I mean, it's nice to have that, but I think it's more of like a co-creation, like guiding thing. I hope that made sense. Yeah, I'd love
Definitely.
to hear from, yeah, Catt or Tyson on the IC part.
Yeah. Gosh, yeah, that was great. Also, I just want to like plus 1,000 on that. Like, I think it's so important that like people who want to manage are like really thinking about the growth of their reports. So I love that that's what you centered around. Yeah, I think like, you know, when you're on the more junior side, there's like all the tactical kind of hands-on things that you're looking for as an IC, but the more senior that you get, the things that you have to think about more are like, how do you manage like stakeholders and communicating between people and like pull out ideas from people in a way that you can synthesize and kind of share more broadly in a way that like is very clear and is hopefully exciting and invigorating for people. And I think that's been a really interesting challenge for me that I find does end up overlapping a lot with like a higher level, like design leadership that you might think of as like heads of design and stuff like that. But like, as you're getting more senior and more senior as an IC, you might find that that's something that you're doing more. There's of course, again, all the things around how do you make sure that you're like building out your design files so that engineers can, you know, go through them, especially when you're working on more and more complex features, which, you know, I've been working on a project that has been in progress for a couple of months. And like, how do I make sure that like that work is broken down in a way that can be clearly communicated to the members of the team, that we're documenting our decisions, things like that. So yeah, I would say that on the IC side, there's always going to be the, can you do things in Figma? Can you prototype? Can you know, think about user experience in a way that really maps to the way that the customers are going to be thinking about the experiences that they're going to be using. But then there's like all the communication stuff that we might call soft skills or foundational skills that I think become even more important because your audience is external, but is also getting more and more, like you're growing your internal audience as well. Tyson, do you have other things you want to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely strongly agree with the idea that like your craft, for me, I feel like the craft skills don't top out so much as you kind of get to a level of competency and mastery that like you're maintaining and learning new tools, but it's not the focus. So as you sort of transition into the latter parts of your career, it does become a lot more about those soft skills. And I think when I think about like what makes really good senior ICs, there's a degree of like comfort with ambiguity. And I think there's sort of two aspects of that I see that are happening. One is around our own career progression and wondering like, what does it mean to be a senior? And I think like obviously my career took place at a different time than right now. So it's hard to necessarily project my own experiences on what it would be like to be, 5 years or 10 years ago in my career today. But I do think there's like the path stops being clear and it starts being something that you become individually responsible for. And it's less on your manager to grow you into those latter levels and more on you to figure out where there's impact and communicate that to people. So there's a lot more responsibility on your own part to own that, which is really hard because it also can feel like passing the buck. And I've been on sort of both sides of this discussion where like I've had to try to coach people into being more senior, but then also moving into a place where I'm an IC myself and trying to figure out what that role looks like. It isn't clear. And I think we as an industry are looking for more clarity there. And I think we can come up with better tools to think about it. But right now it's still very ambiguous. And the other side of it is kind of, Catt, I think to your point, like that feedback part of it. And I think that in thinking about like what has been successful in the past couple of months for me, it's like knowing what hills to die on and where to put effort and where not. I feel like early in my career, especially, like everything was important and everything was a fire and I was terrible all the time. And certainly I still feel pretty terrible a lot of the time, but I know like when to pull off the gas and be like, that problem is not going to be that big of a deal. So I'm not going to give it that much of my attention. But then identifying the areas of impact where you're like, ooh, that's going to be spicy. Like I'm going to dig in on that part. And doling out your energy more efficiently, I guess, is kind of what I've seen be really successful.
Awesome. You all kind of alluded to the challenges that you face. Can you speak a little bit more to that? And also in the chat of what are some of the challenges and or tactics that you use to communicate through those issues, both as managers and as ICs? Jina, do you have any challenges as a manager, or is everyone perfect at Asana?
Well, I definitely have challenges, but I'm trying to think what I want to speak to. Sorry, to further understand the question, challenges with myself or challenges with others?
Challenges you face in your role as a manager, managing stakeholders or communication in general.
Yeah. So this is something I'm actively working on, but one of the areas I'm trying to get better at is confidence and, being a little bit more vocal during meetings. I sometimes tend to get a little shy. So that's something I'm trying to improve on, especially as a leader. And also, trying to encourage the folks on my team to do the same. Like we had this amazing intern recently who did great work, and she was very shy. And so I was coaching her to be confident and realizing I'm talking to myself right now. So there's that piece of it. And then there's, our team in particular deals a lot with giving feedback or coaching because we do design systems work. And so the way we are present in critiques and the way that we do our office hours, and the way that we give feedback, useful feedback, and being clear on the type of feedback we give is really important. So that's definitely a growth area, both for me and my team.
Awesome.
Should we shake up the order a little bit?
Go for it.
Yeah, I feel like I've been going first.
So. Yeah, we don't need to put you on the spot first. Easier to follow than it is to lead in these panels sometimes. Yeah. Challenges as manager, I'll speak kind of to my personal experience of like what was hard about sort of the time at Asana. So context, when I started managing at Asana, we were probably like under 200 people, like not many people. And then rapidly things just got bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And I think the challenge is like scale is really hard. There's a comfort with like what you're doing today is probably going to break in like maybe even 3 months. So being nimble while like sticking to the parts of the process that work really well. I think Asana's done a really good job of holding on to like kind of the bones of who we are culturally as kind of this bedrock that the process kind of evolves around. which has given us a really nice sense of continuity as a company, while being able to adapt. But that is so hard as a leader. Me personally, like the further I got abstracted from the work, the more uncomfortable I was. I'm a particularly craft-centered leader, I think, in general, as far as like the spectrum of, we'll call it like org building versus pixel building. Sure, that's a spectrum now. I really always stayed really close to the pixels, and I always found the org stuff inherently a little bit uncomfortable. Like I love the people part of management. I love coaching people through the work, and I love crit, but I didn't get a lot of energy about writing templates for people to use to present. I just didn't. And it took me a long time to realize like that was okay. And maybe that's not where I wanted to spend my time. And, you know, I think moving back into IC was a very like overt way of getting away from that. There's other ways within management where you can kind of figure out ways to accommodate it. But for me, yeah, like the challenges of the abstraction were real. And recognizing, you know, I didn't recognize until after I'd made the transition that abstraction was killing me.
I was just working on some presentation templates yesterday, and I love that shit. So there we go.
See, this is it, right?
Success. It's a fit.
Was that the first cuss word on the panel?
Whoops.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want the takeaway for this to be like management is a bunch of bureaucratic BS. If you don't like that, don't do it, because there's so much cool shit about management. But you know, like where you put your energy and how it's drawing away from you ends up being important.
That's huge. Yeah, I absolutely love all of that. Gosh, I'm like, it's like really interesting to think about like senior IC side wise, like what are the challenges? I mean, like I definitely think there's some sense, speaking of scale, of like scaling your knowledge as like a person who's representing your corner of the product or like larger amounts of the product over time. And I think that, you know, again, kind of going back to like, what's the right fidelity of information to share with certain groups of people? Like, you know, the things that are relevant to your team aren't necessarily going to be relevant to product designers outside of your team. There are things that might be relevant to those product designers that may not be as interesting to the head of product, for example, and just making sure that you're putting yourself into that person's shoes, like the people who are going to be consuming that information is usually what I do. So yeah, I've been thinking a lot about ways to kind of, you know, of course there's empathy work that you do with your customers, but how can you actually also start to think more about like, I'm a head of product design and I have 5 minutes to understand what, for example, goals, which is my product area in Asana, like how does that work? Or like, what's the deal with those customers and what are the major problems? And I just have to synthesize that to as tiny and consumable piece of information as possible. And I'm also thinking a lot about like, just the right fidelity of information that we communicate about, hey, we're thinking about releasing this product, things like that. So yeah, I think there's a lot about communication strategy that I'm just deeply curious about. And I find to be really fun to kind of go down a rabbit hole of. It's just like very curious. And yeah, my adorable cat's here.
There was a question in the chat, and I think we've all it's been touched on a little bit of, is it safe to assume ICs focus on a single product until it's done? And it sounds like it's less like that. It's more about complexity and breadth of what you're undertaking. Anything else you want to add on there of like, what is the distinction between what you're working on as an IC versus what you're working on as just a more junior designer?
I think
Hard one.
It is and it's not. I think that the idea that there's a shape of work is wrong. Not wrong, but it doesn't hold true. So like the work that I'm doing right now is very much jumping into different teams and getting ramped up really quickly and coming in and helping, which is like, oh my God, so much fun for a variety of reasons. And that's like one way to deliver impact as a senior IC, right? You can come in, you can ramp up quickly. I have the benefit of having a lot of like, obviously contextual and institutional knowledge of the product. I think it could be just as true that I could take on something a little bit more like complex and meaty and 0 to 1. But the needs of, the business and the team is for me, at least personally, like what drives me to where I want to be working. I think for junior folks, a lot of what you would, like, we talk a lot about this in terms of our success guides too, which is like when you're junior, your stuff's more directive. So complexity is certainly part of it, but how much direction and how scoped things are end up making a big difference. So if you're coming fresh out of college, you can work on a very complex problem as long as your team and your partners have kind of scoped you to a part of it where it's like not leaving you with as much ambiguity to work with, and it can drive you to execution a little bit quicker. So again, that early career, focus more on the craft, because what you're probably struggling with then is like, oh God, okay, I got to learn this design system. I got to like remember all these things about interaction design and visual design and rules. Like you're steeped in getting mastery of your craft. So the more you can strip away the additional complexity of the project, meaning the scope, the easier it's going to be able to focus early.
Yeah, that's great
That's
advice.
fun. Yeah, I really think that, yeah, for me, what like reflecting on what I've done over time, it's definitely that it's like the earliest work I mean, like sometimes you work at a startup and they're just like, good luck. But for a lot of the times I've, had a lot of help when I was earlier in my career. I would do a lot of check-ins with the person who was managing me, and we would like much more directly work together on ideas. I would pair with other designers in a way that was more like that person was senior and like, I was kind of the newer person who was like learning and absorbing information. And then at some point it kind of flipped. And then it was like, okay, now you're the person who's like more responsible for like the more complicated parts of this feature. And then it became, you're responsible for the feature 0 to 1, good luck and figure it out. And in my case, like, there are days where it's like, I don't know what I'm doing. And like, you just have to sit down and figure out how to direct yourself in a direction that gets you closer to what you're doing. And I think that's like a big part of the ambiguity. It's like that feeling of a little bit of overwhelm becomes something that you feel confident that you can do something about, rather than something that is nerve-wracking and just kind of makes you feel like there's no point. So knowing how to deal with that, I think is a big sign that you're ready.
100. And how do you see the role of product? How do you see the two roles of an IC and a manager working together at Asana? What does that look like?
I have like many thoughts. I feel like when you're earlier in your career, I kind of alluded to this, where like the relationship of an IC to a manager when you're early in your career is much more like that person is definitely a coach, but there might even be actual like very hands-on collaboration. And then with like, as you grow in your career, like now I usually am just like, I got this, like, I'll let you know if you need to like jump in, but like 90% of the time, get out of my way. I'll tell you what's going on. You can trust me and it's going to work out. But I want that person as a person, like as a senior plus IC, like I mostly want my manager to be out there going to bat for me for things that like the conversations that I'm just not in. And if that person's like aware of initiatives that are coming up or things where I might be able to help, conversations I'm just not privy to for XYZ reasons, like I really feel like that's the kind of relationship I want to have, where like, yeah, essentially like, I don't know, the image in my head was like, oh, we're both doing our little battle against zombies, and like, managers over here doing their things and I'm over here doing my things, and we're just kind of like working together, like much more side by side than like a parenty, like coach kind of relationship, if that makes sense.
I will totally battle zombies with you, Catt. I love that.
I really want to run with this metaphor more, but it's going to get way too nerdy way too quickly. Yeah, I think the IC management relationship, at a baseline is like coach and supporter, and we talked a lot about servant management in general. I think to Catt's point, or to elaborate about Catt's point too, I think that as a manager, when you're managing someone earlier in their career, the ways that you interact can feel a bit more reactive and in the weeds on small things. And as someone progresses through their career, the kind of get out of your way sentiment, to me, it always felt like I trust that I don't have to ask how things are going, because that person will let me know when something's an issue and I know it will be important. So there's becomes this level of like, yeah, it's the zombie parallel works, right? Like maybe you're building the barricade together and you're teaching the more junior person like how to I don't know, nail the boards into the door. Whereas, with a more senior person, like, hey, go upstairs and make sure that's secure. And if they run out of nails, they're going to yell and help you, but you don't have to constantly be like, hey, you need more nails. It's like, no, they got it. Promised I wouldn't run with that, but I felt like I had to.
I feel like the relationship with my designers, it varies depending on what they need. And so like with some, it's coaching them through best practices for design systems. Some might already be good on that level. So it's really more about how to have better influence in the company, so it's like the type of coaching and the type of mentoring I do is different based on what they need at whatever level they're at. I think back to, we launched dark mode not long ago and we used design tokens to do it. And, having done it before, like there's this tendency of wanting to just jump in and do the work, but I had to kind of hold back and like put, more trust in the team to get it done. And, I gave my feedback and like my thoughts, but basically wanted them to like do it so that they felt ownership over it and they really would do a good job. And they did an amazing job. And I still feel like I have ownership in it, even though I didn't write a single line of code or push a single pixel in Figma, but I still was able to have that collaboration with them. And so it's fun to be able to do that type of work on a different level. And being on design systems, we're working on so many different projects at one time, sometimes our own projects, as well as with other teams on their projects. And so, you kind of have to be able to like zoom in and out of certain abstractions with the various things that we're focused on.
Definitely. All right, we're closing out the end and we have lots of Q&A coming in, so we will address them. But last question just for the panel as a whole, where do you see the future of our industry and how do you see the role of product designer evolving in the next 5 to 10 years?
We're all going to be PMs in 5 to 10 years. Everyone in New York.
Oh no.
Honestly. Oh, that's so good. I do feel like, I've definitely seen over the past 5 years, it's like more strategy. And I love that. Like, I really love strategic thinking. I definitely would decline to do more of the deep KPI type conversations, but I will say that it is very fun. And I hope that we continue to be, to have a seat at the table in that way. Cause we were pushing for that for so long. So yeah, I mean, the tools are going to change and all of that, but yeah, like more strategy would be cool.
Yeah, I feel like the progression that, at least the story I have for what I've witnessed in my career, is designers becoming a lot more basically accountable to their work to the company. I remember there's a quote an old boss I had would say where he'd be like, go to your room and look at the stars or whatever it is that you do, which like to me really embodied both this really nice like lack of accountability. We're like, well, if that's what you think I do, I guess I can do anything. But also like how diminutive, like this is a skill. Like I build a thing. You wouldn't go to a carpenter and be like, go to your workshop and I don't know, look at the wall and cut some stuff. Like that's not, there's precision, there's thought put through in these things. And I feel like the push we're seeing now is we are a lot more involved in strategy. We are being relied upon a lot more for way beyond the pixels, which is amazing. And I think the shift that feels like starting to happen is a focus on business accountability. So how are designers accountable for their work within the company they work on? Now that could be something as simple as like revenue, depending on the kind of company you're at. It could be the good your company is doing, but how do we get more connected and accountable for how our work directly impacts the people we're, the customers that we're working with, the users we're touching, but also the business we're working with. And balancing customer and business needs, if you're working in product design for a product company, frankly, is like, that's it. That's the hard part.
Yeah, I would agree. Being the design system person here, I'm so tired of seeing the same buttons get redesigned over and over and over again. It's like Groundhog's Day. And I feel like with design tools and design systems getting smarter and more efficient, that our focus will shift. And it is going to be more product and business focused. And what I'm seeing more of, which I'm really excited about, is attention towards like ethical business practices and inclusion and things that, I think a lot of us were already aware of, but like it's becoming a lot more expected. Like, there are companies that will have like whole teams focus on this. And so I'm really excited to see that in the future of like, even though I love pixels, like not focusing just on pixels, focusing on bigger problems.
Part of the strategic shift that we have to make sure that we do is not just fully toward business. Like, I think that what I'm most excited to see is that like human centric, like how do we make sure that we're, like thinking about our customer experiences and our business in a way that like does active good and like does not cause harm. So fingers crossed that we continuously make sure that that is a valued part of the conversation, because optimism is great, but I think we've all been through the past several years together, and we all know how that went. So I'm excited to see more of that.
100%. Something that brought me to Asana and something that I love most about this work is the triad, working closely with Eng and PMs and with design to kind of solve problems. And I think we all flex in different areas, and more I'm seeing like crossover between our skill sets. But overall, the distinction for product and UX is to champion the user and really be that voice. So thank you for all those thoughts. So we have a lot coming in from Q&A. There's two that are pretty similar. Thoughts on roles where ICs take on 1 or 2 reports and still executing on work, but leading design and working with folks. And similarly, if at Asana, do managers work both part IC and as a manager, or do you focus one or the other? I can answer that off the bat because I am new to management at Asana, and I am currently in that hybrid medium where at Asana, you're a full-time manager with 3 reports, and any less than that, you're still doing some IC work. So I'm still doing a blend of both. Anything else that you all want to add, or we can move on to the next one too?
Oh man, I think
thoughts on that.
I think that it is a temporary thing. I don't think it's sustainable for someone to maintain. Like, for some people, maybe there are exceptions, but I think generally speaking, being able to focus on one and not have to balance both eventually is important. So to expect someone to be able to deeply focus on their manager skill set while also being asked to do IC, even if it's only 1 or 2 reports, is a lot. And there will be times where we need to flex like that, but I think that it should always be a goal to get that person to a place of focus as soon as possible and then flex. And I have both been in that hybrid role and put people into a hybrid role many times in my career. So.
Yep. Any other thoughts, Catt or Jina?
Yeah, I was just gonna mention, I was going to do what you were doing, Micah. When I started, I had 2 designers, and now I have 5. So definitely, unable to really do as much hands-on work as I initially was going to. But as I mentioned, with like projects like the dark mode project, I can still have the impact I want in a project like that just by, co-creating and getting the team to come to those solutions together in a way that we're all happy with. And so it's fine for me. I did also want to mention, I think the question also started with like ICs taking on 1 to 2 reports. One thing that I think is interesting at Asana that I haven't seen elsewhere is when we bring on interns, we actually pair them with an IC that mentors them. And so it gives our ICs an opportunity to kind of wear that hat a little bit of meeting regularly with that intern and coaching them and mentoring them. And I think it's a really great model that we have. And so it's a nice way to kind of, dip your toes in the water and see.
100%. There's another follow-up question of how I personally balance that information, or that those 2 roles. And I actually think it's a nice amount. And it's a good amount to have 3. In a prior work, I designed for 3 teams and managed 1 person, and that was too much. So I think just designing in 1 domain is still the part of the craft that I love as I'm developing my management skills. Awesome. And now we're gonna go lightning round Q&A style, where I'll ask a question and one person on the panel, feel free if it strikes you to answer. So are there any managers within our product design org who don't have a product design background themselves?
I don't think so.
I don't think so either.
I don't think so either. Like, I mean, I feel like I like the spirit of the concept of being able to like learn about management and like, you know, do a great job regardless of your focus. But I do feel like you should at least have some familiarity with what people are gonna go through. So like, if you aren't a designer and you want to become a design manager, I think that you should spend a lot of time learning, you know, because people are going to be coming to you, especially earlier in their career, to learn how to do their roles, and you want to be able to help them with that.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because I've managed an engineer, I've managed engineer, I've managed, like, there are certain disciplines within brands that get kind of out there too, but are still at least creatively connected. So it's possible, but yeah, in our current org, we don't have anyone. That also feels like one of those things where like you can do it for a bit, but there's a limit to the value you can supply. So if you are in that situation, you want to find a pair engineering manager who's closer to that craft to help out with stuff that you just can't, and be willing to sort of share.
Good question, or good point. This one I really like is, when does the imposter syndrome stop? Half joking. And how do you all know when you're ready to take the step to a manager, if that's what you want?
It doesn't stop.
No.
It never stops.
Every day.
Yeah.
I have it right now. But don't let that
Inspiring.
don't let that stop you.
Yeah, just know that everybody is experiencing the exact same thing and that we're all figuring it out.
Mm-hmm. What training, conferences, books have helped you in your career journey?
I can speak to some management books I've read recently, particularly when I started this role. I really love, I hope I don't butcher the title, it's like Making of a Manager by Julie Zuo, or I hope I pronounced her last name correctly, but great book, fantastic book. It really resonated with me. A while back, way before I was even a manager, there was an engineering management book I read called Managing Humans by Michael Lopp. It's a really good book, even though it's engineering centric. Yeah, those would probably, oh wait, and one more, Resilient Management by Laura Hogan. That's another great, those would be my top three.
Yeah,
Great.
plus one.
I see some in the chat too.
Yeah, I read that book even as the Making of a Manager specifically. And I find that, again, because some of the things you do as a more senior IC are just like people communications related, that there were a lot of points of value in there. And for anybody who's thinking about like more staff design type plus roles as an IC, definitely look at staff.design if you haven't already. It's very, very good. And there are some staff engineering, I think there's like a staff engineering book. I'm forgetting the name right now, but there's a couple of books like that you can also look at. And there's a lot of parallels between design and eng on that.
Awesome. I posted also the book that we all read when we joined Asana, the Conscious Leadership series. I think that's really helpful for being your whole self at work. So these two are somewhat related. Is how do you know if your design team is effective, or rather many initiatives take a long time to see the tangible business outcome? How do you connect value with the work if it may be months or years for a project before the biz outcome is clear? Been there.
I'm trying to find the text so I can reread it in person.
Same, I was looking for it.
Yeah, so
deep
I'll say again,
queue.
more broadly, how do you know if your design team is effective, and how do you measure that in some areas where the business impact might be hard to measure at first?
I can take a crack at that. I mean, I feel like that's why my answer to the 5 to 10 years question is design getting better at this, because I feel like there's been a bit of a groundswell around like, how do we measure our accountability? And I think you see things like NPS as being a metric that design can affect, because we build an experience that people then rate us on. I think you can abstractly say, well, I worked on a feature and it contributed to this revenue for the company. I think it's possible that in the future we can come up with even more concrete ways of measuring that. But I think like customer and user sentiment ends up being a really big one for us in terms of stuff that the rest of the organization may not be already paying attention to. And I think the reason that design and business bridging as much as possible, I think Jina made this point about inclusive design earlier, which is like the reason we can get, or a way to get inclusive design even more visible is to prove business value. And I think with things like the experience, it's a very different world now than it was a while ago, where like customer experiences say, not maybe universally, but fairly clearly regarded as like, it will give you value if you have a good customer experience. But that wasn't always the case. So the more that we can use, come up with better ways to make that linkage, I think the better off we're going to be.
Definitely. Some around, what is a way to prove to leadership that you're ready and interested in management, especially if you've never done that before? Kind of like the time old thing, you got to have the experience before you can get the experience.
That's a hard one. I mean, like, I guess one thing that you could start by doing is, I don't know if this person has done it yet, but you could ask why folks think you're not ready for management yet. Because just understanding what their perception is of you up front can help you to actually then form a plan and show those actual skills. I think there's like abstract stuff that I could also say, which is, are you mentoring people? Like, are you doing other forms of thought leadership type stuff that might make it clear that you're a smart person that other people can learn from? But I really think that the core of the question is just you working with the folks who are in charge of that to figure out what's missing right now, if anything.
Yeah. If they don't know your intention, you're relying on someone to see you, and you can't do that.
That is a huge thing also, like just as you're growing as a designer, as a person in the workforce, you need to make sure to communicate your intentions, because one of the most unfortunate things that I did for many years is just kind of wait and hope. And when I actually started telling people what I wanted, my life changed. So please do that.
Definitely. I think, Tyson, you had mentioned the mushy middle before, and I wonder if there's some kind of transition period here, because there's also questions around, if I'd like to become a manager, but I'm new to the company, should I focus on being a high performance level IC to build a reputation, or should I just try and switch into management as soon as possible? Like, is there room in that mushy middle for a transition from IC to manager?
It probably depends on the org you're working in too, because I think that traditionally speaking, a high-performing IC is the first person that people look to promote into management or move into management. That's just like historically what the industry has done. I think that's not a great trade-off. Like, that's not how we should be doing these things. But there's so many stories of like, oh, they're a good IC, they must be a great manager. So I think you have to suss out a little bit of what your org values. Because I think that you having an intention and voicing that's a big part of it, but then understanding like what the bounds of the organization is to figure out like, well, how should I show up, not just to build my own skills, but what are they going to see? Now, I think you could ask yourself a question of like, if I work at a company that can't see beyond just being a great IC, being a great manager, I think that might be a red flag in and of itself. But like with most of these things, you have to understand the field you're playing on a little bit. And I don't like equating career growth to a game because it implies that it's gamey, but there is a bit of like, there's a context you are working within and expectations that the folks who run your company have of someone in management. You need to figure this out.
Definitely. And then we have a couple questions for junior designers. So what is one piece of advice you would give to a junior designer? And then as a manager, what do you typically look for when hiring more junior level designers transitioning into product? And maybe who have experience in other areas.
Should we tackle the first question first, or?
Whichever strikes your fancy, of any advice and or things you might be looking for in junior designers.
I guess for hiring a junior designer, I can speak to that part. Yeah, I would be looking for somebody who shows enough of potential, like maybe they don't have the highest craft, but you can see the potential to be able to grow in that area. And then also, depending on the type of work they're they're doing, like if they even have like the passion or interest for it, like, you know, if you're hiring for an inclusive designer, do they show that in the way that they talk about their work? Are they passionate about inclusive design? Then that's, for me, enough to go on, knowing that I can help coach and guide them towards the more senior stuff.
Yeah, I think advice wise, I mean, I really liked something that I think, Tyson, you said earlier around picking your battles. Obviously, there's all the self-advocacy stuff that I also kind of alluded to, but I think that knowing where to put your energy is very, very important. And there are going to be so many times where you can like fight for something and you have to figure out like, which thing am I going to put the most work into? And then making sure that you actually communicate what you want in different ways. Potentially, if it doesn't work the first time, try something different. Don't do what I did, which was just bring it up in meetings over and over again and not, you know, try to illustrate it in terms of a plan or anything. Like, just document your ideas and go to different people, like try different things if you really, really care about something, but make sure it's something that's worth putting that energy into, because you don't want to be the squeaky wheel constantly without there being a reason for being that wheel.
Advice. Visual design is a practice craft. You can't just get it from a book. You got to do it hundreds and thousands of times to get good at it. Like that's distinctly different from some of the other skills you learn in product design at the moment. And the other thing is share your work all the time. I don't know, just visuals have such a strong communication capability. It's the easiest thing for people to disagree with, which is the most irritating thing about being a designer, because you show someone something, you're like, I don't like X. You're like, there's thought put into that. But there's a power in being able to stimulate conversation using visuals because of that quality. And that can become, instead of a bane, it can become a boon if you're willing to accept, like, I'm putting this out there to prompt a conversation and to be disagreed with, as opposed to, I want this to feel perfect. There's a lot of power in that. And the opposite of that is sitting in a silo. And then when you finish the house of cards, you put it out there and someone touches it and it falls down. And that's so much more disappointing.
100%. I'm looking up too. I think something I look for, and something I think that's really important to flex your craft in, is mapping and modeling as well, to show your thinking visually in more ways than just wireframes. And there's a blog post about that I can put in the chat in a minute. To round us out, we're about at the hour. I really love this question as a way to kind of close out, is where are you hoping to continue to grow, and what areas are you eager to tackle next in your career?
I kind of already talked about mine. Like, I want to be a more confident manager, and so I'm still learning that. And I hope to, yeah, grow into being the best manager I can be.
Yeah, I want to just keep working on my storytelling for these new audiences that I have now. Just like getting better and better at being more concise with insight sharing and things of that nature.
I'm such a bad example. I don't know. I just fumble through things and hope that things are hard. And when there are hard things to do, I tend to just try to do them. Like, I've always been really bad at that kind of planning. I think that's okay too. And I admire everyone who has like a stronger sense of structure around their career than I do. And feeling comfortable. There are many ways to walk down all this stuff.
Awesome. Well, thank you all for taking time and chatting with all of us today. It's been a pleasure. Apologies to anyone I didn't get to your question, but we hope to talk to you more. There's right here, please keep in touch. Also, we are hiring. Follow us on all the channels to learn more about open Asana roles. And thanks so much.
Thanks, y'all.
Silent
Zoom
wave.
Zoom waves for everybody.